I'm been invited along here today because someone nobbled me at the Liberal Democrat conference this past summer. I was invited there because Mark Durkan came over and some other people from Northern Ireland who were in the negotiation of the Belfast Agreement. And I was involved in those negotiations. Just a wee bit of history about the negotiations. They started off with the Sunningdale Agreement 73, the Downing Street Declaration 93, the Framework Document 95, then the Belfast Agreement 98. That was followed by the St Andrews Agreement, which was, well, I think it was a bit of a fig leaf to get the DUP in, but it also dealt with some policing issues. And then so on and so forth. So it has a long track record. And the negotiation of the Belfast Agreement was just one element in that. But what was very special about the Belfast Agreement is that there were elections to negotiations, and these were designed deliberately to get everybody inside the tent, including the Republicans and who represented the IRA, and the Loyalists who represented the Red Hand Commando, Ulster Defence Association, Ulster Freedom Fighters, etc., etc. So everyone was going to be inside the tent. It also bring in the Women's Coalition and other wonderful people that contributed in a very positive way. So then I had 10 political parties to negotiate with. And I was an informal negotiator. I wasn't part of the formal negotiations. My job was to develop public opinion polls, develop ideas, run the public opinion polls, and then bring the results back to the negotiators. The critical thing is that all the parties agreed the questions, and we did that on through the process. So the first couple of polls dealt with shape of the table issues, who should be at negotiations, where, when, and how, should we have a referendum. We then had it took 6 months to write the questionnaire, but then we produced this document in search of a settlement. And every element that is in the Belfast Agreement was tested against public opinion here, and stories were written in the Belfast Telegraph, reports went out, it was online. Everybody was informed. The public were informed, the people were informed. They were involved in a common research program which ended up in the Belfast Agreement. And I would just want to remind you that this... And I went on then and got involved in negotiations in other parts of the world. And I thought, well, this is how negotiations are done. But unfortunately, this particular process in Northern Ireland turned out to be quite unique. And this is not how negotiations are normally done at all, unfortunately. So this ended up then with the Belfast Agreement. Here it is. This is the copy that went through my door as it went through the door of every household in Northern Ireland. And so when it came to voting in the Belfast on the Belfast Agreement, and that's going to be celebrated on next week on the 22nd of May, and the Yes campaign are going to have a party in Northern Ireland as part of that. It was a rational decision. Everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. They'd been informed about it over the previous year of negotiation. They had the document in their hand, and when they went and voted yes or no, they knew exactly what they were voting for. Brexit is not like that. Brexit is an entirely emotional decision that was taken in a very emotional way. And one would hope if they do have a second referendum, it might be a rational decision like this, but that takes a lot of spade work to get everybody involved and everybody knowledgeable to the point where they can make a rational decision like this. I would hope that if they do have a second referendum, it's done that thoroughly, but I would have my doubts about it, in which case maybe the parliamentary procedure is the correct way to go. So let me just tell you a little bit about the negotiations. We had everybody involved including when Sinn Féin were coming into negotiations for the first time. They hadn't been in formal negotiations before. So when I sat down with them and talked about, well, what do we want to put in this questionnaire and how should we phrase it? And they said, well, let's call in the British imperialists should leave the 6 counties and go back to England. Okay, Jerry, that's a nice idea. And then I would go and bounce it around and I'd end up with Mark Durkin, and Mark said, well, I can see their point and I understand they want to put that in, but maybe we could change the language a little bit because they're just not really going to get much mileage if they phrase it that way. Let's take the British imperialist bit out and so on and so forth, and we reworked it. And then I was in with Davy from who represented the UDA, and there'd been a lot of discussion about north-south bodies, and that was coming into the negotiations. He says, Colin, if we just have north-south bodies, that's not going to work too well. We need to counter that with a strengthened relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom. I said, okay, well, let's have a council of all the parts of the United Kingdom, including Scotland and Wales and the Channel Islands. Okay, and what are we going to call this, Dave? He said, well, look at the map. If you look at the map, you see the sort of pink islands there. It's called the British Isles. Okay, Council of the British Isles. So then I go off and see Sinn Féin, and they smile a lot. And then I go and see Mark Durkin. He says, no, that language isn't going to work. Let's just drop the British bit out of it and call it Council of the Isles. Okay, so we ended up with a Council of the Isles. So my point with all of this, and then, okay, I'll tell you one more story just to put some more empathy into this. In the negotiations, terrible events happened because people wanted to derail it. So Grey Steel Massacre happened one day, and I went up to Stormont Castle and into the restaurant, and it was like a wake, but a wake of somebody who died too young and there was no drink. It was just a terrible atmosphere there. And then everyone said to me, well, Colin, this isn't going to work. No, it's going to work. It's going to work. I have to be a kind of a cheerleader, and you go around and say, this is going to work out. And you've got to put on a brave face. And I know everybody else involved in trying to get the negotiations through had to do that. But then when it came to the end of the day and you're exhausted, then I went home and cried. But you don't do that. And in the negotiations when you're trying to get everybody to agree a deal. So I just want to put the rational bit and the emotional bit together because they all go together. And I just don't see an opportunity coming along right now where that sort of perfect... We were talking about a perfect storm earlier on of how things are terribly going wrong at the moment. We had a perfect storm then of everything going right. And to get that perfect storm back, I think would be extremely difficult. So there's just I've got 3 takeaways here. What's happening right now, I should add that in all the research we did, there's a whole page in here about a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland, which included language rights. And it's also, there's a page of it in the Belfast Agreement. And they're not being done. They haven't been done. At the recent review of the Belfast Agreement, I think some of the senior politicians were saying, well, we got a deal done. It's up to you guys to sort of do the peace-building stuff and put it together. It's not that easy. It just isn't that easy. So there are what Sinn Féin would call acts of completion. There's acts of completion yet to be done. There's a lot of the Belfast Agreement that hasn't yet been put into law, although it was agreed. So right now we have the bad perfect storm of Brexit, the DUP having so much influence in Westminster at the present time, and it's just a perfect storm for continued failure. So Ireland in Europe, we did a wonderful thing getting to the Belfast Agreement. The peace process sets a standard for best practice in how to get to a peace agreement. A couple of people mentioned Cyprus here earlier. I was working all through Cyprus the last year, and they it's not an inclusive negotiation, and I have to quit. And so I'm not sure where all this is going to go, but it doesn't seem to be going to a very good place. Thank you. Right.